The Future 100 is a report that VML has been producing for 11 years now, and it's our view on the 100 trends that matter for 2025 and beyond. So what we do is we explore the emerging futures from the lens of the consumer, culture and innovation to identify trends at that intersection. And the idea really is that we identify emerging shifts that can translate into opportunities for brands and businesses. So by identifying and understanding the future that's coming towards us, the idea is that we can hope to shape that. So by seeing ahead and planning for these emerging scenarios, we can take advantage of that, whether that be, by identifying an opportunity, a risk, or even, opportunities for innovation. So that's the idea, really. We've got 100 trends, so it's quite hard to pick three. But I think I would choose three that point to kind of interesting kind of macro themes, right? So first of all, one trend I would choose is called reality shift. So this is all about how young generations, Generation Z, are adopting a more loose relationship with reality. So whether that's through things like manifestation, or there's a whole culture on social media around being delulu, short for delusional, right? And it sounds initially on first glance that, perhaps this generation is opting out of reality, but in fact, what it is about is really their way of imagining a better one. So if you think about, younger generations, right now are really struggling to see a clear path to the future in terms of their careers, their, finances, relationships. And so by using their imagination and imagining different realities, it's actually a way of building optimism and building towards a better future. So I would say that one, reality shift. The second one I would talk about is augmented humans. So this is a trend all about how we as a species, as humans, are leveraging technology, AI, but also other technologies like robotics, and using that to up-level our capabilities. So that might be, exoskeletons that enable us to walk further or faster. It might be smart glasses that allow us to have the power of, the world's knowledge just in our field of vision. So all of these are really kind of, I think, responses to a world in which we see the rise of AI as this powerful technology that is challenging us as humans. And so in response, I think we're using technology to up-level our own capabilities. And then the third one, I guess I'd like to talk about, made by humans, is also about artificial intelligence, but more about our relationship with it. And in this trend, what we see is people really kind of embracing the human in creativity. So it's not a rejection of technology per se, but it's more an indication that it's really important to us that we retain the humanity in creativity. So what we're seeing is a kind of, not really a backlash, but people kind of pushing back against wholesale use of AI in creativity, in films, in music, in advertising. And it's really kind of a desire to kind of hold on to the originality, the improvisation, the imperfections, things that make creativity kind of human and relatable. We've been studying Generation Z for probably about almost 10 years now, and what we do see is that they're a really interesting generation because, despite the fact they're growing up in what is a really complex and challenging world, where there's so many kind of factors making it difficult for them to see, what their future will look like. So, the difficult financial market, the jobs market, even understanding what career you might have in the future, and will it still be a career in 5-10 years' time, are things that, previous generations haven't had to think about to the same extent. And of course, throw in, something like climate change. There's some big factors really that make their lives more precarious and more challenging. But despite all of that, we've always seen that they are a very optimistic generation. But the way that optimism is expressed is quite interesting. So, you know, they're very pragmatic, they're very practical. They will kind of mobilize and try and kind of create their own change. And so for that reason, I think this optimism will prevail because they're a very kind of proactive generation. We've seen that sort of in previous years, how they're prepared to mobilize and kind of, you know, take part in protests or in activist movements, but also in the way that they are, you know, they have quite an ironic, satirical sense of humor. So the way they cope with a difficult situation is through this sort of, you know, maybe quite absurdist sense of humor. So I think they cope in different ways. I think they tackle problems in different ways, but all of that is just part and parcel of their kind of their route to optimism. So potentially it's one that looks different than we might have seen optimism 10 years ago, but it's one that makes sense. This year we really noticed that there are some very clear contradictions that show that people aren't sort of following the same paths they used to in life. They're not conforming to the boxes that we like to sort of create for them. But I think, you know, actually this is something that's been happening for a long time. It's just maybe a little bit more apparent this year. So, you know, we've seen for a while that, you know, talking to people in the context of their demographic doesn't really make sense anymore. You know, people don't live their lives in that sort of linear way of, you know, school, work, marriage, retirement. We don't live in that way anymore. And so I think these things have been breaking down for quite some time. And really what we're seeing now is maybe an escalation of that. And, you know, we see that very little about our current context makes logical sense, and, you know, the way we behave fits into that same pattern. So yes, I think you know, from a brand's point of view, from a business's point of view, it's important to really kind of really be on top of how are people really living, you know, not sort of thinking about what our expectations are, what the stereotypes are, or what we've done in the past, but really kind of, you know, understand what people's lives are really like and how they are living, because I think these things are changing and evolving really quickly. And so it's more important than ever to kind of, you know, really kind of harness as much data as we can and understand, you know, more intimately our consumers' lives in order to be able to adapt and evolve really quickly. So I think, yes, it will be a process of, you know, continual monitoring and evolution, because I think, you know, that whole kind of pattern that we got used to maybe 20, 30 years ago has kind of broken down for good.